Hi, welcome to another quest. Now, in this quest, we'll be discussing an interesting phenomenon that occurs around us every day. We use it when we ride our bicycles, we feel it when we rub our hands together, and it enables us to walk. So, have you ever noticed that when you kick a ball in your school field, this ball actually starts moving with a very great speed, and then it gradually slows, and as it keeps on moving, it even eventually comes to a stop? Or when you rub your hands together very fast, after some time, you feel them becoming hot? Now, this is caused by what we call friction. So, let's explore friction. Now, what is this friction? And why is it actually relevant to us in physics? First of all, you have to know that friction is a force. Actually, friction is a force that tries to stop an object from moving over another. Now, try to picture friction as an opponent in a contest whom you have to conquer before you can move one object over another. This actually means if you don't have a greater force than your challenger, who in this case happens to be friction, of course, you certainly can't move that object over another. Also, the greater your force, the easier it will be for you to actually move the object. Now, friction is a force that opposes motion, meaning it acts in the opposite direction to the force you're actually applying. So, the more you apply force to an object in one direction, what you have to know is that friction is also busy on the other side applying its own force, but actually in the opposite direction. Now, please note that friction is not always as negative as you actually term it to be. In fact, do you know that walking is actually made possible by friction? Yes. The friction between your foot and the ground is what stops you from actually sliding and even eventually falling. Now, have you tried walking on a tiled floor that has some water on it? Have you noticed how difficult it is to even stand? Now, this is because the water on the surface of the floor actually reduces the contact between your feet and the floor, hence reducing the friction between your foot and the floor. Now, friction can be very useful to us, like when you apply the brake on your bicycle. Now, these brakes actually stops the tire from rotating, but then it is actually as a result of the friction between your bicycle tires and the ground that actually finally brings your bicycle to a stop. So, if there were no friction between your bicycle tires and the ground, then the bicycle will keep on moving. Now, even though the tires of your bicycle have actually been stopped from rotating, this kind of motion where your tires will keep on moving even though they are not rotating is what we call skidding. Note here that friction does not stop when you start moving an object. In fact, what you have done is actually overcome the first opponent, which we call static or limiting friction. So, what is limiting friction? Now, limiting friction is the maximum force that you must apply to get an object to actually start moving. So, after you've overcome this limiting friction, to keep the object moving, you have to face another challenger. Now, this is because friction doesn't stop when you start moving an object. In fact, this challenger is who we call dynamic or kinetic friction. So, who or rather, what is dynamic friction? Now, dynamic friction is the force that tries to prevent or stop an object from moving over another. Now, note here that this object must actually be in contact. In summary, the friction that acts between two surfaces or two objects that you have to overcome before you actually start moving it is what we call what? Static or limiting friction. While on the other hand, the friction that acts between them while they are in motion and try to stop them from moving over one another is what we call dynamic or kinetic friction. So, friction also occurs between solids, liquid, and gases. Now, Have you noticed how difficult it is to actually walk in water? Or have you ever noticed why if you throw a feather from the top of a building, it takes longer for it to reach the ground? Yes. Now, the friction between your body and the surface of the water that actually makes it difficult for you to walk through it is what we call fluid friction. And the friction that stops the feather from falling down from the air and making it difficult is actually because of the air resistance. And these two are examples of what we call fluid friction. That is what? The friction that exists between either liquids or gases. Now, there are certain laws that govern friction. Now, these and more are what we'll be looking to explore in our subsequent videos. So, always remember that if you really wish to do something, you have to find a way to do it. If not, you will instead be looking for an excuse. Remember to keep watching and keep studying and be with us even as we look to overcome friction.